The title of his talk today is Unmasking Exploitation, Investigating Illegal Money Lending in Ireland. After working in Today Tonight, he went on then to work in RT's current affairs flagship radio programme, Morning Ireland. In 1994, he was appointed RT's Religious and Social Affairs correspondent. He's been a member of the RTE Authority Board, and he's been honoured by the disability lobby, Inclusion Ireland, and the Incorporated Law Society of Ireland. So I'd like you to give him a very warm welcome. Thank you.
Díomh agus fáilte roimh go dtí an léach seo. It's a great pleasure to be back in Limerick. Thank you, Mary, for inviting me here. I remember, as I was saying to Mary at lunchtime, I remember this campus when it consisted solely of Plessy House, if you can imagine that. And when the first group of students came in, I applied to come in the second year and decided against it, but I enjoyed hearing of the experiences of many of my older brothers, peers, who were here at the very beginning of this institution, at the foundation of this institution. And I can see from everything I've seen around me since on my visits that it has thrived, and you have a lot to be proud of here in this university. In fact, my goddaughter is a PhD student here in linguistics, so I still hear firsthand what's happening in the colleges. So I'm going to look at current issues in Irish journalism. I know that after lunch can be a very difficult time. It was the time I remember when the Crescent was in the centre of the city, and we'd come back to class after lunch and we'd either be admiring Bill Whelan down at the bun shop finishing off his bun before he came in, or the pigeons across on the roof, and you'd be distracted by anything at this time of day. So I'm going to fall short on the entertainment stakes here, folks, so bear with me as I go through some of the background, first of all, to the investigation that I'm going to discuss and show you bits of later on. So in this talk, I'm going to recount and reflect on my most formative experiences in investigative reporting. The events took place 30 years ago in 1985, when I was completing my 6th year as a journalist in public service broadcasting. I was working for RTE's flagship television current affairs programme, as Mary mentioned, which is called Today Tonight, for which I'd already made investigative reports on the Stardust disaster, the Stardust fire, which some of you may have heard of, where over 30 young people had died in Artane in North Dublin at a disco in a converted warehouse, where there were very questionable practices like locking fire doors, which we unmasked very quickly immediately after the St. Valentine's night fire. And I also worked on investigations of dodgy savings and investment ventures, which my colleague from Limerick, Eugene Murray, dubbed fringe banks. We worked together on these. Eugene was a producer. Those fringe banks included a place someday you might like to Google when you have nothing else to do, called the Tontine Society, Tontine, where hundreds of retired CIE workers lost their life savings due to a combination of fraud on the part of company directors and the lack of effective state regulation. I'm giving this seminar because I've been invited by Mary, your senior lecturer in journalism here, to pass on to you some of the lessons I learned from working on a particularly challenging story, particularly early in my career. So I hope that the questions you will ask me later will draw out some of those lessons that might be of help to you. The project I'm focusing on was a 2-part investigation of money lending in this state, which was commissioned by the then editor of Today Tonight, again a man whose name you might like to Google, Joe Mulholland. He's in his mid-70s now. The executive producer of the programme, as I mentioned, Eugene Murray, is an economics graduate from a business background. His father was a builder here in Limerick. And by 1985, he had honed his skills as a radio producer in RTE before specialising as a television current affairs producer in coverage, particularly of economic stories and business stories. Writing in 1984 from a position like this, sitting in a university, I think she was a sociologist in UCD at the time, a year before Eugene and myself teamed up to do this investigation, a sociologist called Mary Kelly reminded us that the development of current affairs television as we know it here in the Republic of Ireland didn't really take off until the late 1960s, most notably in the form of RTE's 7 Days programme, which was established in 1966. It was the fledgling Irish television station's attempt to emulate the BBC's prestigious and trailblazing Panorama programme, which of course still exists, although it's not given the same kind of slot on BBC as it used to be given. But any of you who've watched it will know that it's still a very top-of-the-range current affairs programme. It was watched along the east coast of the Republic only in this country, and as well as along the border with Northern Ireland, where homes with aerials could receive overspill signals from the United Kingdom. In other words, there was no systematic transmission of BBC programmes in the Republic at that time. That was to come later on in the 1980s. But the signal, it's worth bearing in mind that signal from the BBC and the ability to watch programmes like Panorama was particularly important to the Republic's ruling elites, who were concentrated in Dublin, where the BBC and ITV were available to any household that could afford the then quite expensive equipment, a television set and an aerial. But the elite was in this loop. The elite in the Republic of Ireland knew what good current affairs television programming was from the stable of, probably the most prestigious stable of current affairs at its time, based in London, and also based in Granada in the ITV network. So 7 Days was also minted in a context where BBC and ITV were already setting the gold standard in public service television programming for Irish broadcasters, because the broadcasters, virtually all of them, also lived in Greater Dublin. There were no regional offices apart from Belfast. So people in broadcasting in Ireland were in a way unrepresentative of the general population, because they were viewing top grade and also dross material that was coming in from the British stations. So any of them interested in current affairs really were kind of had ready-made seminars every evening they went home. They could turn on their televisions and watch really high-grade current affairs television programming. They had been able to do that with radio as well, but radio wasn't as popular a medium. Radio 4 clearly wasn't making the same impact in the Republic of Ireland as BBC One Television or ITV Granada were making back in the 1960s. But that's another shin scale ella as to why television is more impactful than radio. The increasingly probing nature of BBC public service journalism wasn't lost either on Irish policymakers and their would-be successors in the legislature, for example, the judiciary, in the civil and public service, in industry, in education, in the arts. Again, they were heavily concentrated in the Greater Dublin area, and they were watching British television at a time when Irish television was in its infancy. Don't forget, RTE television had only been established in 1961. It was very much in its infancy and very much finding its feet by 1966, when 7 Days was started as a flagship current affairs programme. So, in short, discerning television audiences in the capital were having their appetite whetted for top-quality current affairs, while elected rulers were watching with more than a degree of nervousness from Merrion Street, as the Fourth Estates, Montrose, Greenhorns sought to establish how far they could go in making government accountable to the people in new and dramatic ways. But would the relatively young Irish Republic, stunted in many ways by Ireland's legacy as a colony and riddled by chronic poverty at that time, would it be willing to countenance and able to withstand television's myriad challenges to authority, which even a casual reading of the British press revealed were causing turbulence in the Mother of Parliament itself in Westminster, at the centre of the British Empire? Television was proving a huge new factor in the relationship between government and media in Britain, with the kind of example that broadcasters and the elites were viewing every night on their screens in the overspill signal from Britain, was the Irish institutional framework, government, administration and so on, going to be capable of taking the probing questions in the style in which they were delivered in British broadcasting? That was, I suppose, the context of broadcasting in the late 1960s. The terms of engagement for broadcasting politics were formally declared in 1966, I should say, by Sean Lemass, the then Taoiseach, and I think you can see some of his comment here. He said, RTE was set up. Can everybody read that? So, sorry I don't have a photograph of him. He was a genial-looking gentleman who smoked a pipe, had a moustache, had cut his teeth as a 16-year-old at the 1916 Rising, was kicked in the pants and told to go home by the troops and not executed, and lived on to lead Fianna Fáil when De Valera stepped down in the late 50s, early 60s. So RTE said in 1966, don't forget this is 5 years after its foundation and just at the point when current affairs programming has been established in television. RTE was set up by legislation as an instrument of public policy and as such was responsible to the government. The government had overall responsibility for its conduct and especially an obligation to ensure that its programmes do not offend against the public interest or conflict with national policy as defined in legislation. He continued in this Doyle statement, to this extent, the government reject the view that RTE should be either generally or in regard to its current affairs programmes and news programmes completely independent of government supervision. So I would call those basically the terms of engagement as government saw it between broadcasting, television broadcasting in particular, which was the new boy on the block, and government in the mid-1960s. I noted that in that slide, every time the word government appears in the transcript of the statement, it has a capital G. Not something that would happen today, but it's a bit of a giveaway in terms of how government saw itself. It saw itself as very much a precious institution, which of course it was, an institution which was not to be simply trivialized. It, like the word church for the Catholic Church, or even for the Church of Ireland, got a capital at the front of its name. Government got a capital G at the beginning of its name. I say that because I think it's a measure of the sense of vulnerability which government felt 50 years on from the 1916 Rising, just over 40 years on from the foundation of the state itself. It was not as secure in its image of itself as it would be, say, today. And it regarded any new institution muscling in on its patch as quite a serious development. Yet, Lemass and other parliamentarians of his party and of others were mature enough and pragmatic enough to see that a relationship had to be worked out here. De Valera had opposed, at a personal level, the development of television here. He saw it as a harbinger of outside influences that would, in general, be negative. And it was because of that kind of time warp that De Valera was in that his party finally urged him out of the leadership and got Lemass in. They saw him as a modernist, a modernizer, a pragmatist, and someone who could live with developments like this, like television. Anyway, I digress. I studied history once, so go on with that kind of stuff sometimes. So, the other important thing about that statement, that PowerPoint that I had up last, is that Lemass refers to current affairs programmes and news programmes in particular, but he refers to current affairs before news. These days people often talk about news and current affairs, as a kind of genre description. But current affairs was up there. It was seen, even before it had really cracked any major stories here. It was up there as a particular concern to government. And I think that the wording of that particular statement is certainly worth bearing in mind. By the way, I've got these quotes from Diarmaid Ferreter's History of the 1970s, which some of you may have access to, but I recommend it I recommend its part 3 and its treatment of the broadcasting horizons, the broadening of broadcasting horizons as a source for some of this material, the primary material which I've used here today. So current affairs is in the firing line for government, and to a degree, government is in the firing line for current affairs. This could end in tears. And the controversy played out around the 7 Days programme, its 1969 investigation into illegal money lending. That was a seminal moment in the government's efforts to assert hegemony over the national public service broadcaster, and the broadcaster's attempt to carve out for itself a significant space in the public square. To summarise the programme's genesis, in brief, in November 1969, 7 Days broadcast a programme, the controversies genesis rather than the programme, broadcast a programme alleging that 500 illegal moneylenders were operating in Dublin, which included interviews with a lender, with borrowers and civil society figures who said violence was used to enforce repayments and extortionate interest rates were charged. Months later, the government established a judicial tribunal not to investigate money lending, but to investigate the making of the 7 Days programme. In particular, the sources of its information and the use of hidden microphones and visual reconstructions without alerting the audience to the fact that hidden microphones and visual reconstructions had been used in the making and in the crafting of the programme. So was concentrating on the sources. Who's telling you that money lending is such a big issue? What kind of credibility do they have? To what degree have you named your sources and put them up there? It's investigating the methods of making your programme. What entitled you to put a hidden microphone at a certain point where a moneylender was meeting a client, for instance, or where you were eliciting information from a moneylender? And what entitled you to make a dramatic sequence of money changing hands and not putting up top left reconstruction, but playing it out as if it was an actual event that your cameraman and journalists actually, or camera person and journalists actually witnessed and recorded? That last one, to my mind, was the greatest weakness in the programme. It was where critics could begin pecking a hole in the whole programme's fabric. And once they got a hole, once they got the threads out, they could start pulling and pulling. And that's what happened at the tribunal, effectively. The historian, Diarmaid Ferreter, sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself here. The historian Diarmaid Ferreter, whom I referred to just a moment ago, recalls that a sense of politicians reasserting their control over television had been apparent in the aftermath of the money lending programme, which went out, as I say, in November 1969. The Tribunal of Inquiry, he reports, generated a conflict of evidence between Gardaí and RTE, and Janet Mooney of the programme's research team refused to reveal the sources of her information to the tribunal. The tribunal's report was delivered in August 1970 and contained the following damning indictment. It said, proper care was not taken in the planning, preparation, arrangement, production and presentation of the programme to provide viewers with an authentic and objective picture. By the way, this is the first ever tribunal into media conducted in Ireland. It was conducted under the Tribunal of Investigations Act, which had been used before to investigate a scandal in a pig meat factory in Cavan, a scandal in a railway company, mostly to do with financial scandals, which the governments of the day thought for one reason or another had to be kind of hung up there for people to see as a deterrent, really, against fraud in particular. So here was a tribunal looking at media, not at money lending, mind you, but at the media's treatment of money lending. The Money Lending Tribunal report, August 1970, went on to say, it appears that the 7 Days team, through hearsay evidence, got a very colourful impression of the scale of illegal money lending and of the supposed violent means associated with it. The studio commentary was biased towards the sensational. Now, it said the supposed violent means associated with it. The programme, I'm sorry I don't have an excerpt of it here for you, but if you've ever a chance to look at actually a book by Kevin Rockett and Luke Gibbons on media, which was published in 1985. Mary Kelly's article in that carries some of the script, and from recollection, the studio script said many of us fall into debt, many of us have to buy our fridges and cars and so on, and we carry a debt and we try to pay it out of our regular earnings and so on. But how many of you know what it is to be in debt and never to be in a position to repay the debt? He says that is the side of Irish society we're going to look at tonight. This was the studio presentation by John O'Donoghue, the late John O'Donoghue. And then they carried a clip and they had a guy saying, I threatened them with violence, all right. I mean, nothing that would kill them, but something that would maybe break their legs and convince them that they should repay debts. That was an actual clip of a moneylender who the programme met. Clearly, he was not a willing participant in the programme, but that is what they picked up on in their investigations. And that back-to-camera interview with the moneylender wasn't countenanced as true, obviously, by the Money Lending Tribunal. It said the supposed violent means associated with it. In other words, a man saying that he would have someone's legs broken wasn't regarded as evidence of the genuine picture, the authentic picture, and the word colourful was used. Bias is also used, isn't it? Yeah, there's bias, colourful, hearsay. These are words that lawyers are using, trained lawyers, 3 judges who sat at the tribunal, including the president of the district court, and they were saying, they were applying a level of proof, it seems to me, that would be appropriate in a criminal case in order to get across the line the fact that somebody was guilty of breaking legs. If a programme goes out and does a back-to-camera interview with a moneylender who says, I break people's legs, but I'm not going to tell you what my name is, I'm not going to have the cops coming after me. That was not regarded by those judges as evidence of violent means that are associated with money lending, that were associated with money lending at that time, for sure. The tribunal went on to find that less than 100 illegal moneylenders were operating in Dublin. The Gardaí told the tribunal that 30 were operating to their knowledge. 7 Days, as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, estimated that 500 illegal moneylenders were operating, as many as 500 were operating in Dublin, and they based their information on, as you'll see in RT's statement, on people who they thought were credible witnesses about what was happening in poorer areas of the capital city. It's worth noting, though, before we go on to RT's response, that the tribunal also said that before the programme in November '69, the Gardaí had not considered that illegal money lending was a great problem. Their investigations occasioned by the programme, in other words, after November '69, disclosed that money lending was so prevalent in the city of Dublin as to constitute a minor problem. And then it went on to say, to this extent, just enlarge that a bit if I can. Sorry. To this extent, the tribunal report said, and because the public had been made aware of the problem, the result of the programme had been beneficial. Seems to me that that's someone trying to speak out of three sides of their mouth at the same time. They're saying, damn the programme, protect the Gardaí, because after all, the new evidence only pointed to a minor problem in the city, whereas they thought there wasn't a real problem beforehand. And make a nod towards the public service element of what RT was doing. You know, basically, because the public had been made aware of money lending, illegal money lending, the result of the programme had been beneficial. But there's no doubt what the main thrust of the Money Lending Tribunal report was. It was devastating for our RTE. The whole critique, the first things that I put up there on the board earlier for you, you might like a reminder of them. Here, let's have a look. Where it said, proper care wasn't taken in the planning, preparation, arrangement, production and presentation of the programme to provide viewers with an authentic and objective picture. That was a devastating verdict by any standards. And none of us would like to have that said about any output of ours, whether public or private, whether an exam paper or never mind a public service broadcast. So the RTE Authority, now called the RTE Board, but at that time the RTE Authority was like the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland and the RTE Board. It regulated broadcasting in Ireland. The only other regulator was the government in the form of the legislation that had set out the Broadcasting Act 1961. So this is the RTE Authority, the board appointed by the government to run RTE. Its response to the programme was, or to the tribunal report was, the programme was authentic with respect to the existence of money lending. Many social workers, clergy, medical officers and others gave evidence that illegal money lending was widespread and that it was fundamentally a social problem surrounded by an extreme secrecy that tended to prevent its being brought to the knowledge of the Gardaí. In other words, no offence to the Gardaí for not knowing about this. It's a secretive pursuit if you're going to go around taking extortionate interest rates from people and threatening to break their legs if they don't pay you back. We're not criticising the Gardaí for not knowing about it. The Gardaí shouldn't be as sensitive about this. There are many people of high standing in society, social workers, clergy, medical officers and others, who gave evidence that illegal money lending was widespread and that it was fundamentally a social problem. So what you have here is arrayed on one side, civil society, from social workers, medics, clergy, and other sources, assuring RTE that there's a serious social problem here. And they are being taken to task by politicians who are claiming that the Gardaí have been effectively undermined by the programme's content because they're being accused between the lines of not doing their job, not knowing what's really going on in Irish society. The RTE Authority also said the programme was authentic with respect to the existence of money lending. So we've gone through that. The result of the money lending inquiry, therefore, was important out in that public square where government were in effect trying to put manners on the public service broadcaster, in particular on current affairs. The Taoiseach at the time, Jack Lynch, who had succeeded Sean Lemass as Taoiseach, is quoted by Ferreter as telling his minister responsible for broadcasting, Gerard Collins, almost a year after the tribunal report, the important thing here is to ensure that the extent of this social evil, as it has been described by RTE and at the tribunal, will be identified, will be pursued, and that the Gardaí can come to grips with those responsible for the evil. Lynch here showing a pragmatism. He wasn't going to extract any more political capital out of hammering RTE. The tribunal had done its job. It had reined in RTE. It had put manners on it. And Lynch had the good sense to realise that the public were continually asking, and certainly journalists were continually asking, why aren't they investigating money lending rather than RTE? That was the thing that mystified the public at the time, as I remember it certainly. More importantly for broadcasters, the money lending affair spelled the end of the current affairs career of the programme's reporter, Bill O'Hurley, who had already made his mark for hard-hitting reports on social deprivation for 7 Days and other programmes. He was transferred ultimately to sports, where he more than recovered his popularity, as you all probably know, any of you who follow soccer certainly. His 5 days in the witness box at the tribunal led him to describe himself as a pawn in a political game. The researcher Janet Moody appears to have left RTE disillusioned by her experiences, and incidentally a junior counsel called Mary Robinson gained valuable experience in a variety of ways by acting for RTE as a junior counsel at that tribunal.
Just a point of information there, Joel. Janet Moody, actually, she was a lecturer here in education.
Is that so?
UL for about 25 years. She just retired last year.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating.
It's interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
She wouldn't reveal her source.
She wouldn't reveal her source, no.
Yeah.
No. And that's a point people may like to come back at. Well, that background as to what happened around 1969, 70, 71 provides some idea of the scale of the challenge facing my programme editor, Joe Mulholland. Fast forward in 1985, looking back, say, 15 years to the debacle of the money lending investigation programme in RTE. It was a debacle in the sense that the tribunal had put on record that RTE was sloppy, that RTE was not credible, that RTE hadn't done its job properly. And in other words, that RTE wasn't really living up to the gold standard in public service broadcasting and current affairs, which people had become accustomed to from viewing some excellent Panorama and Granada programmes. I reported to my editor that I had met a senior member of the St Vincent de Paul Society in Waterford City called Martin Arthur. Now deceased, he was an official in the ESB by day, but doing his evening visitations for the charity, St Vincent de Paul, he'd come across a woman who, he told me, was at risk of losing her home to a moneylender, to whom she owed an accumulation of loans which had mounted over a period of years. Mr. Arthur also told me that he had helped to research the problem of money lending, illegal money lending, in the southeast some years earlier, and that the problem was deeply embedded. He explained that this was so, especially in the tillage farming areas of Wexford, because farmers had traditionally, in that area, they traditionally borrowed in the spring for seeds, fertiliser and tools, and repaid their loans after the autumn harvest. This was a form of agriculture which wasn't practiced throughout the country. It was, tillage farming was very much a feature of the southeast, as I think it still is. And the economic management of tillage was peculiar to that area and had percolated into the wider population, most of whom, of course, didn't farm, but they had followed the example of the successful farmers of the area, and they had developed a dependency on money lenders and hire purchase schemes for feeding their families in some cases and buying necessities for often new homes in new suburbs of towns. And their financiers, which they dealt with, acted illegally even when they were licensed under the 1933 Money Lending Act, according to Martin Arthur. Other financiers, other lenders didn't bother applying to the district court for those money lending licenses. So my producer Eugene Murray and I decided to focus on Wexford in the first instance. We read the Money Lending Act, 1933, and contacted community workers, community welfare officers, a curate, Father Hines, in the Clonard parish in Wexford, which included a recently built local authority estate on the edge of town. Borrowers came forward and agreed to be interviewed and to have their loan cards filmed, and in some cases photocopied. And that was very important, that we would get documentary evidence of what the borrowers claimed was happening when they took out the loans and when they started repaying the loans. When they weren't able to repay the loans, typically they'd be offered another loan, and moneylenders' cards were actually set up in that way as you would see if you were able to watch the whole programme. At one point, we got various concessions from the industry, basically admitting to the fact that even the most respectable firm in the country, the largest one, was breaking the law in how it presented moneylenders' cards to people. That Money Lending Act had, of course, been introduced in 1933 at the beginning of the Great Depression. Not quite at the beginning, you could say some years into the Great Depression, and itself followed an Oireachtas inquiry into the extent of money lending, at which, for instance, the Garda Commissioner insisted that something had to be done by the lawmakers to curb the activities of moneylenders. Our programme was being made during a much milder recession in the mid-80s, when the levels of unemployment were unprecedented in the urban areas of the country in particular. And the level of need in society was palpable, and there were not the same kind of opportunities for people to emigrate. Many of them had young families and were locked into living in poverty in the country. So I'm going to try and find some material from the Wexford investigation. I said we investigated Wexford in the first instance. We then did a countrywide investigation as a second programme. But let me try and find for you some of the Wexford material. You'll have to bear with me now as I do this. And find the footage. Okay, I'll just hold that slide. You probably wouldn't... that's how we did graphics in those days. They weren't quite as... slick as they're done today. So what we were saying here was I suppose the research that we did revealed that typically moneylenders lent £100 for 26 weeks, and they were charging £39 in interest, which, when you double the 26 into 52, clearly that's a 78% flat rate of interest. But if you just look on here now, and you'll see, oh yeah, here's playing.
Loan. Now let's find out the real rate for this £100 loan. All moneylenders take their payment not at the end of the 26 weeks, but in 26 weekly instalments. So by week 26, the final week, the vast bulk of the loan has been paid off, but interest is still being charged as if the original £100 was still owing. Calculating with the help of these consumer credit tables supplied by the British Office of Fair Trading, we found out the real rate for this loan. When the £139 was paid off in 26 weeks, the moneylender netted a staggering 282%. At this rate, a moneylender can treble his money in just 1 year if all his borrowers pay up on time. So here are those figures again. A loan of £100 repaid after 12 months with £39 interest costs a flat rate 39%. Then the same loan repaid over 6 months costs a flat rate 78%, and that's illegal. And using the same method as licensed banks use to work out their real rate of interest on a term loan, we found the real rate of interest charged by many moneylenders, legal and illegal, is a whopping 282%.
These people are basically, the way they operate is completely unjust. The amount of interest that they charge is completely unjust. I would use the word immoral in that situation.
And it's causing a crisis at Wexford Credit Union. 25% of low-income members here are borrowing from moneylenders. It's dealing with so many moneylenders' victims that it's decided to stop accepting new victims until after Christmas. Tom Anslow, Credit Union President, describes the typical moneylender's victim.
Oh, they're all basically families on low income, but not exclusively the families on low income, but the vast majority would be on low income.
Well, this must cause a lot of stress in a family on a low income to pay 70-80% interest.
Naturally so. Financial problems on any family causes stress. But we have some members who come to us in problems and they are fairly distressed.
How would you describe the state they're in when they approach you here at the office?
Well, there's various states of distress. You have some people who may be very distressed, while others, you know, they're not too worried really, except they have a problem. The ESB are going to turn off their light tomorrow night and they have a problem, but some of them can take it. Vast majority can't.
But Kelly's not the only man locking these people in their moneylender's prison. Come Christmas, when they want the good...
The first person you saw there was a priest. He's a curate in Clonard, or was a curate. I think he now works in Brazil. Father Hines, talking about the immorality, you know, the stresses on families and the immorality, as he saw it, of the I wonder what's happened here. The second person was Tom Anglem, actually a Limerick man, as far as I know, who was head of the credit union in Wexford at the time. But I showed that to you primarily to get across to you that we decided to be forensic in describing the loan practices, the business model, as they would say today, of the money lending business. You know, we had discovered plenty of cards, we'd interviewed plenty of people where it was clear 78% was being paid for loans and more at a flat rate, effectively 282% annual percentage rate, APR as it's called now, which was calculated, as you saw there, from the Board of Trade tables. And we decided to be absolutely forensic in showing that, because we had earlier, of course, explained that the Money Lenders Act, the Money Lending Act of 1933, had stipulated that 39% was the maximum interest rate that could be charged. 39% flat rate was the maximum interest that could be charged. Forgive me for dodging between flat rate and APR, but any of you who've been into borrowing money will know that there is a significant difference. But anyway, the Money Lending Act of 1933 laid down a flat rate of 39%. It also provided for a service charge on the loan, and that will emerge hopefully later on if I have time. The day before the programme was broadcast, the Irish press wrote an editorial, an extraordinary editorial, warning RT about broadcasting it. They hadn't seen it as far as we knew. We clearly had opposition from individual moneylenders who, if you watch the full programme, you see some of them accused me of harassing them, harassing their families. Within RT, we had full support from our editor, Joe Mulholland, and he was in turn supported from upstairs, by the Director General and so on. A third person joined us in the editorial team, Joe Tiernan, on foot of Dáil questions that Michael D. Higgins had asked. And we went to Galway. Joe was a West of Ireland man. We went to Galway, we went to Cork, and we went around Dublin making a second programme. And none of us were at any stage nobbled within RTE or told to compromise on what we were doing. And that seemed to be the consensus in the elites about this programme, that the programme had actually exposed a major social ill and something had to be done to address it. What happened was the Combat Poverty Agency, which was emasculated by the last government, which was a kind of a semi-state think tank and research body which looked at poverty issues, was founded by a Labour minister in 1975-76 with Sister Stanislaus Kennedy at its head. That agency decided to come to us and to do further research on what we'd found out. And it made a recommendation that the state should row in behind some kind of public service for people in debt. And what happened was the Money Advice and Budgeting Service was established indirectly on foot of the programme being broadcast. So there was very strong opposition from the same kinds of sources who were very upset by the first money lending programme. Des O'Malley had done nothing to support the programme makers at that time. He had been a Fianna Fáil minister. And he clearly didn't like the RT's approach. It seemed in particular to business people who we found were acting illegally and who the guards were doing nothing about effectively. so, it was touch and go for a while. We were not sure, how the chips were going to fall after the programme was broadcast. But it's a very interesting question. I hadn't intended going into that because, but that is a very interesting question. Thank you.
Any more questions? Do you want to go on?
Okay,
Joe,
let's plough it. Would people like to go into discussion at this point?
The main point about all this programme is that Joe was actually able to get people to talk on the record after a programme where people they'd made before where sources had been discredited by this tribunal report. And it was a brave programme in a way to revisit something that had actually led to a journalist being moved out of news into sport, and Janet Moody, who was the researcher, had left RTE. So this was basically...
it was graveyard. It was a graveyard for journalists to go into. And it's not saying anything for me personally that I did it, but my editor, Joe Mulholland, who was longer in the tooth than I was and had been around in RTE at the time of the money lending crisis, had the independence of mind, the responsible editorial attitude that, look, there's a story here that's of significant public interest, it has to be told. And he gave us full support to do it. Over kind of 2.5 months, I think we made the 2 programmes.
A big problem that a lot of our students have, that they say to you, is a lot of them have to go out now and interview people and set up interview sources, get sources on the record. They're doing this kind of 5,000 word final year project, which is basically kind of an investigative piece. Could you maybe talk to them a bit about how you build up a relationship with a potential interviewee who is maybe afraid to talk on camera, and how you get them to talk on camera, maybe from your own experience?
That's a very difficult question, and it's a practical question at one level, and it's an ethical question at another. Because certainly for me, at the end of making the programme, I felt exhausted, but also highly apprehensive about the impact this was going to have on our sources who made themselves known. I mean, families just stepped out on doorsteps and they told us. Introduced by, say, the St Vincent de Paul Society in Galway, in Waterford, in Wexford, Dublin. People said, no, I'm going to tell you my story. Sometimes it was because they knew that they had the support of a community group or a charity, and they felt, the St Vincent de Paul thinks this is wrong. They're helping me. I mean, I'd like to help them out to highlight it. That was the dynamic. That was the dynamic that seemed to work in most instances. For example, the woman whose home was in danger, she didn't make herself known, and Martin Arthur, my initial source in the St Vincent de Paul in Waterford, told me this woman would be more than her life would be worth to go on the record. But it provided us, it was serious enough a report for me to have brought back to my editor, Joe Mulholland, to say this is happening. This is coming from, a pillar of responsibility in Waterford society, was saying this is how bad it's got. This woman could lose her home if the moneylender persists and use all the legal mechanisms that are available to bring her to court and get the deeds of her house.
And he was quite brave to go on the record, Joe, wasn't he? Or was he afraid?
No, funnily enough, Martin for some reason didn't. He gave the task to one of his colleagues. I'm not sure. Let me just look here. One of his colleagues came for. Okay, this is probably the most important interview that we got.
So just turn up the sound there, on the right.
Right.
See.
Oh yeah, see it here. Okay, I'll just start this again. What's happened here? Sorry.
Just go back into it, play.
Okay, this is a retired Garda superintendent, John Gurry, in Wexford. And John Gurry approached us during the making of the programme. Clearly the word had gone around, a curate had spoken to us, community organiser had spoken to us, the Vincent de Paul nearby in Waterford knew about it, and in the way things happen in this small country, John Gurry found out and contacted us when we were staying in the Talbot Hotel in Wexford and making the programme. And he had gone, the way the money lending licence still operates is you apply to the district court for money lending licence, the district judge asks are there any objections, and if there are no objections, he simply renews your license or gives you a new license, and or if you already have one, renews it. If there are objections, the judge will have a hearing of the objections. John Gurry objected to the awarding of a license to a man called Martin. And Martin was in the habit of taking children's allowances books, child benefit books, as they're called now, from women. All child benefit, there were no electronic payments of child benefit at the time. Everybody getting child benefit had to go to the post office or arrange to have it transferred into their bank. Very few people had bank accounts who were on low incomes, very, very few. So you could say 100% of people, 99.9% of people who were not very well off had to go to the post office every month to get their children's allowance payment. It was the only payment that a woman could be sure to get for the maintenance of her children. If in a situation, for instance, where her husband was drinking or had abandoned her or whatever, women were totally entitled. They were the only people who were allowed to go in and sign the check, like a check, give it across the counter, and they got the money in respect of each of their children. But Martin had, like many moneylenders, and it was mentioned in the tribunal report that RT was correct in 1969 to point out that moneylenders were taking women's children's allowance books, saying, I've lent you, £500, you're going to be paying so much a week back to me. She says, I don't have it. Well, I'll take your children's allowance book then, and I'll go with you each month to the post office, and you'll go in, collect the money. I give you the book outside. I'll be minding your book all the month, all through the period of the loan. I'll give you the book outside the post office. You'll go in, collect your money, come out, give me the money, I'll give you back. And you give me back the book, and I hold it until the loan is paid off. That is illegal. And Gurry had tried to get this highlighted in the case when Martin was applying for a renewal of his money lending licence in Wexford District Court. Gurry at the time was serving Garda superintendent, chief superintendent. But the judge said, I have it here on my Word document, but the judge at the time said the only question, he didn't use the word, but the only questionable aspect of your business, Mr. Martin, is that you are taking a woman's children's allowance book and collecting money from the post office in order to, because he himself went in and got the money on one occasion. We interviewed the postmistress who saw this happening. Gurry, the Garda, retired Garda, put us onto the postmistress outside Wexford town. We went out and we interviewed her. She said, yeah, he came with that allowance book and I paid him the allowance the first month. But when he came back the second time, I'd been tipped off as to what he was at. And I told him, I'm not going to pay the money to you. So your man had to go out and try and persuade the borrower to go in and get her money and give it to him. She did that. But the Garda got to hear about it. The Garda tried to get the borrower to come to court and testify that this had happened. The borrower said she was afraid to come to court. Not because anyone had said they beat her up, but she was afraid that she would simply not get any more loans, and she couldn't get loans from any other source. So Gurry said, he told us, basically that the law wasn't working. You can hear him now, I hope.
The credit union, you say, and after 13 weeks in the credit union, you're entitled to a loan, 3 times what you've got in, you see. So she could put £10 a week in the credit union. After 13 weeks, get a loan of a few £100, pay back Martin, call him Martin, and finish with him. And then whatever she's paying, pay credit union, and she'll be paying a lot less interest. And the interest with him is far too high. I think it's daylight robbery,
Well, the total on these loan cards is for loans of £1,200. Have you borrowed £1,200?
Oh no. Just small loans each time.
Well, have you got 1,200?
Surely I haven't, no.
How much money have you borrowed from this company?
Well, £100, maybe £50. The most is about 180 at one loan, at a time.
So if the most is about 180, that means you borrowed less than £600 altogether.
About that, yeah.
But you're paying back for £1,200.
Yes, the interest is a lot,
And when would you take out a new loan? I see here that when you were paying back your first loan, you missed a repayment. But a week later, you're taking out a new loan from this company.
Yes. Well, if I have one loan paid down so much, I just ask him, is it alright to get another loan, and I clear that up, and they give me another loan.
Even when you're missing payments on your
Yes,
first loan,
yeah.
he will give you a fresh loan.
Yes, yeah.
And you go on missing payments then on your second loan, but I see then you get a third loan.
Yes. Well, anytime I needed that money, like, and I just ask him for a loan, I get it, you know. I mean, I haven't missed that many weeks, I just miss a week now and again, sort of, you know.
But it's clear you were missing weeks around the time he gave you fresh loans.
Yes, yeah.
And he knew that.
Oh, you knew that, yeah.
Did you ever think that you were going to be able to repay these new loans?
Well, I don't know, just when I needed the money, I asked him, and he'd give it to me, you know.
I think he's just trying to get him hooked, get him, you know, trapped, so that they have to give out most of the wages every week, you know.
Hooked.
Yeah, I think that's part of his policy, like, you know, give an extra loan to pay off the original loan, and getting deeper and deeper and deeper until just can't get out.
I think that's what's happened to
That's
me,
what
you know.
most of them money lenders, that's their policy with people with low income. Because people with high income wouldn't be getting lent off in the first place.
So you're saying that Margaret here is addicted, she's hooked.
Well, she's hooked. That's a fact, you know. Unless she can get a loan elsewhere, a legitimate loan from the credit union somewhere, and pay off Martin and get out of his debt. Like, it's her only way out. Like.
Last year, Colin Martin was the subject of a police investigation. The man who headed it was former Garda Superintendent John Gurry.
Yes, I began an investigation into illegal money lending following receipt of a report that was made by a very reputable person to the effect that the health of a lady was seriously diminished as a result of getting a loan from a money lender which she was unable to pay off.
The lady's doctor made a complaint to you?
It was, yes.
So the lady's mental health was in danger?
Yes, the psychiatrist confirmed that.
We've read that woman's statement to the Gardaí, alleging that Martin lent to her without her husband's knowledge, and when her husband lost his job and she couldn't pay up, Martin then threatened to tell him, and finally he came into their house banging their furniture. Gardaí then interviewed another woman whose statement we've read. She'd borrowed from Martin, then he took her children's allowance book. And former Superintendent Gurry's team also uncovered Colin Martin's habit of breaking the law by demanding payment from borrowers at their places of work.
That particular borrower owed the moneylender money on foot of a loan received. The repayments were not forthcoming, and the moneylender threatened to inform that borrower's mother of the situation. In that same instance, actually, the moneylender, he went to that person's place of employment to demand repayment as well. And on that point, the law is quite specific. Unless a borrower invites the moneylender to his place of business or to where he's employed, the moneylender is prohibited by law from going there.
Wally Cogley was also the victim of Martin's illegal visits.
If Colin Martin went to the house and you weren't in, he'd know where I'd be working, and he'd come down there to work for his money. And I'd just pay him and let him go.
Did this happen more than once?
Happened on a few occasions.
So he approached you at your workplace to pick up money?
That's right, yeah.
That's against the law? For him to do that?
I didn't know that, no.
The Garda investigators took a series of statements, including one from Martin here at his home. Over 12 months, police uncovered his frightening reputation for aggressive behaviour towards customers in their homes, Martin's visits to a borrower at his place of work to demand repayment, and then Martin's threat to report that borrower to his boss if he did not pay up. Not one of the witnesses who had borrowed money and who appeared in court on foot of that Garda investigation is willing to appear on this programme. I've spoken to 3 of them already today, and each of them appeared agitated, vulnerable and very frightened at the thought of being mentioned in this television investigation.
They need the moneylender.
They need the moneylender.
And in some cases they may be afraid of the moneylender.
That can happen indeed.
One crucial witness withdrew her objection to Martin's moneylending licence here in court. She had given her children's allowance book to him as security for a loan.
I would say myself it was an illegal practice indeed, and against the law, for any moneylender to go along and endeavour to obtain cash on foot of a children's allowance book in respect of a borrower of his. To me, that is illegal.
Now, the person whose children's allowance book he had actually stood up in court and said she had no objection to him getting a moneylender's licence.
Yes.
Are you surprised that somebody whose children's allowance book he had taken would then turn up in court and say he should get a moneylender's licence?
She was summoned to court by the Gardaí, and again, that lady, prior to that or at that particular time, had a loan from Mr. Martin, and I can well understand her not giving adverse evidence against him.
You're not surprised that she recommended him for a licence?
Not in the least.
But one independent witness also complained Martin, the postmistress at Screen Post Office, Bridget Cullen. She told the District Justice about the 2 days Martin presented his borrower's allowance book for payment here. Tell me how often Mr. Martin came to you.
Twice.
And did he get money the first time?
He did.
And the second time, what did you do?
The second time he didn't get it. I refused him.
Why?
Because I knew who he was. I knew he was a money lender then. But I didn't know the first time. I thought he was her husband.
What did he say when you refused him?
He said nothing at all when he gave out. And I don't know what he was saying. He was giving out. I wasn't putting any heed in him. Because I put no heed in him at all. I let him give out away.
Did he try to persuade you to give it to him?
He did. He said I should give it to him. That he'd make me give it, that he'd have to give to him. He'd report me.
He'd report you if you didn't give it to him?
If I give it to him.
And how much money was he looking for, Mrs. Cullen?
I couldn't tell you. She had 3 weeks, 3 months anyhow.
3 months children's allowance for 3 children?
For 3 children. How many
That's
children
about
had she?
£100.
About nearly £100. It was nearly £100.
But despite this evidence, District Justice Dunleavy granted Colin Martin his certificate to hold a licence. He told Martin the only unsavoury aspect of his behaviour was taking a children's allowance book from a borrower. The judge acted in accordance with the law. Martin's company is licensed, but it's charging rates well above the legal limit of 39% interest, and this card proves it. Martin opened this account for 77%, and according to Anthony Lowney, that's the going rate here.
So that may answer some questions about... From the background, you realise that the tribunal laid a lot of emphasis on the fact that the Gardaí were being undermined by RTE. This programme, for whatever reason, a Garda was prepared to come out and say what had happened. And we got blow-by-blow accounts of the court proceedings, the Garda investigation and the court proceedings. And we're able to show that in a place where moneylending is very common, as I mentioned earlier, in Wexford, a district judge was quite happy to allow someone to get a moneylender's licence despite being told that the moneylender was basically was acting illegally in the view of the guard by taking a woman's children's allowance book every month, going in and taking the money for himself rather than allowing her to take it out for her children. So I think what we managed to do in that sequence was to show that there was establishment connivance in the conduct of illegal money lending in the country. And there was also very grave unhappiness in the local elite in Wexford, if you can call the Garda superintendent retired and the postmistress, you know. What was going on? They knew what was going on and they were prepared to blow the whistle on it. And I think that was probably key. That forensic pursuit of the evidence was key to how we managed to persuade the establishment that an investigation of money lending by public service broadcasting had been responsible, accurate, and required a policy response from the government and from the banks and the other credit institutions. And I think that possibly sums it up, does it? Sale to rent scheme that I'm going to highlight here, that MABs have highlighted to me. These new schemes are available, yet who is there to tell people how to access them when they're stressed, they're totally on the ropes in terms of debts and trying to keep their kids fed and so on. MABs has developed a sophisticated suite of services basically that they can put you in touch with. But as the man said, not many people know that. Have a look at this.
The St Vincent de Paul Society has urged the Minister for Energy, Alex White, to intervene if retailers don't stop surcharging pay-as-you-go energy customers on a scheme that helps them to pay off arrears. One of the companies providing the service has begun disqualifying shops that are levying the unauthorised charge.
This morning, the Musgrave Group, owners of brands including SuperValu, said any of their stores selling pay-as-you-go electricity and gas display notices stating they charge fees for the service. This followed the Money Advice and Budgeting Service's finding that virtually all shops in a poor Dublin suburb were imposing a surcharge of as much as 10%.
These are people who would have these meters installed who would have maybe serious arrears. So as well as paying arrears and as well as paying for their electricity and gas usage, now they have these extra charges upon them.
Then PayPoint, one of the two electronic payments companies concerned, told RTE News the surcharge breaches our contract with retailers, whether or not the shop tells customers beforehand. It had dropped one Crumlin retailer and was serving notice on others which are surcharging. It said the problem was caused by the bank's recent increase in charges for depositing cash by as much as 100%. This had had a devastating impact on retailers.
If you want retailers to provide a service, which is a very valuable service for communities, where people can come into shops and pay their bills, then the utility providers must ensure that the retailer is reimbursed for providing the service.
I think retailers really need to reflect on the fairness of their actions currently. But if they're not for turning, and if people are exposed to up to 10% of a surcharge onto their energy payments for an essential item, then it really is, the onus is on the new minister, Alex White, to intervene.
The energy industry umbrella group, the EAI, said it realised that the surcharge was damaging some of its customers. But a spokesman said they'd need more details about retailers' cost increases before deciding if they could sacrifice some of their income from the scheme to help boost retailers' commissions. Joe Little, RTE News, Dublin.
Sport now and...
All very complicated, or do people understand the basic thrust?
You might just explain it, Joe, what the story was.
The story was that, and it should have been self-evident, but I don't think the story is particularly well told. MABS got on to us saying that they'd done a survey in West Dublin, which found that of the convenience stores in the area, I think 90% of them were charging people a 10% surcharge if they came in to buy a pay-as-you-go energy installment, 10 euros worth of electricity or gas or whatever. These pay-as-you-go energy cards have been rolled out by the Department of Social Protection and Department of Energy and the energy utilities in order to get over the crisis that they had during this recession of disconnecting people. What they've said is, okay, we won't disconnect you anymore. You have a bill of €500 to pay to us. We're going to put in a pay-as-you-go energy meter. You're going to pay as you go for every 20 euros worth, 40 euros worth of energy that you want. And we will take a certain amount of that to pay off your 500 debt, okay? So we make an individual agreement with you that's tailored to what seems to be your budget situation over the next couple of years. But you'll be paying as you go with your energy. You're just going to have to stop using energy if you don't have money in the kitty on a particular week, or you're going to have to find a way of reducing use of energy. And there was a great benefit in it for the utility companies because they didn't have to bear the social opprobrium of going out and cutting people off, didn't have to bear the cost of going out and cutting people off and then reconnecting them when a deal was made through the credit union of Vincent Paul or MABS or whatever. So people on these pay-as-you-go energy cards found that initially, okay, it was fine, they were buying their energy, and there were no reports at the beginning of surcharges being put on the cards. But then the shopkeepers decided, we're not getting enough of a commission from the electronic card companies. There are two big electronic card companies that act as agents for, Bord Gáis Energy and, the different ESB kind of companies. But the retailers are saying, we're not being paid enough commission by the electronic card providers, so we're going to take an extra commission from these people coming in. The problem is that these people were already on the ropers because they had arrears of debt to the utility companies, and they were trying to pay back those arrears, pay their energy bill as they went along. Their current energy obligations had to be paid each week that they went into the convenience store and bought their 20 euros worth of electricity. And yet the convenience stores were levying them. And I spent a full night getting on to SuperValu and Musgraves, I think, were the two big chains that were involved, and getting to their managing directors and asking them, what is your official policy about this? And we ran it as a story essentially that morning on Morning Ireland, that the companies, the two big chains, the SuperValu one and Musgraves, were increasingly uneasy at MABs, revealing that they were allowing their member stores to surcharge poor customers who are trying to pay off their energy bills. And as you saw, RG Data spokeswoman came out and said, well, we're not getting enough from the electronic card companies, so we're going to take it from the customers. So the story began with, if you're going to be charged extra for your pay-as-you-go energy, if you go into the SuperValu chain of stores, they're going to have a notice up saying you're going to be charged.
Yeah.
So it was forcing them in a way to own up to the fact
Yeah.
that they were surcharging poor customers. That was that was the result of MABS doing a small survey in a local area, and again having a source with MABS where they would come to you with that story. So this is a report that went out last month on a Sunday evening on the...
The state's Money Advice Service has counselled 300,000 people in financial distress during the current recession. Figures released to RTE News indicate that since 2009, MABS has helped its clients deal with debts amounting to at least €2.5 billion.
According to official figures, to date this recession has pushed over 500,000 people into enforced deprivation. And the Money Advice and Budgeting Service has acted as a free field hospital for many of them. Half its clients have mortgages, and inevitably some fall into arrears. One customer told me how arrears of €15,000 mounted over the past 2 years after a muscle-wasting disease forced him out of work. After reducing repayments to make ends meet, he stopped them altogether last month when ill health forced his wife to give up work.
Since I joined MABS, at least the pressure of phone calls, constant phone calls from my lender has stopped. Whereas before I joined MABS, I was receiving letters, 2-3 letters a week, maybe 6 phone calls a week. And it got to a stage that at one time I wouldn't answer the phone if I seen a private number coming up.
He and his wife are entitled to €340 in social welfare every week. On many days, they don't have enough to heat their home and eat properly.
Food comes before heating. In my condition with the diabetes, I have to eat, and I have to eat the proper foods. So I have to sacrifice one for the other.
MABS has advised him to apply for supplementary welfare payments, and it's negotiating with his lender to bring him into a little-used state scheme called Mortgage to Rent.
The scheme entails really that you were a homeowner paying a mortgage and you end up being a tenant either of a local authority or of a housing association, and you pay a rent that you can afford.
The Department of the Environment says about 2,600 applications have been made for the housing association-based scheme, but only 64 have been successful to date, and another 442 are being processed actively. A further 1,000 applications are with the lenders, who are seeking the borrower's consent to have independent evaluations and other actions undertaken. MABS criticises the scheme for being too restrictive and also the veto which it says has been given to lenders over its operation. Joe Little, RTE News, Central Dublin.
The National Assets Management Agency.
In my experience or in my talking to colleagues, I have not come across advertisers being able to exert that kind of pressure. I have read of complaints from the 1960s. I think Lelia Doolan, who subsequently taught media in Uri Galway, she, I think in a book called Sit Down and Be Counted, with a number of other producer directors, complained that there were problems in relation to a consumer affairs show in the 60s, that they were not, that the advertisers in general put pressure on RTE, saying if you're going to be going on with this kind of consumer, these exposés of shoddy goods and so on, you know, advertisers aren't going to be as keen to advertise with you. That's my recollection, is the thrust of the account that Lelia and others gave. But I haven't come across that. I would like to see more Know Your Rights programming. There used to be an element in the afternoon program on radio. The Mooney show, as it was, you know, perhaps Ray Darcy's editors would consider it. I know it's regarded as rather arid broadcasting, you know, to tell people what their rights are, and a little bit like going to school. But I think that there are ways of doing it which, you know, people might find interesting. And certainly a BBC programme that my wife, Mary, put me on to a couple of months ago. There's a brilliant BBC Two programme on sale of shoddy goods, you know, the Sale of Goods Act being breached in Britain. It's brilliantly done, and I recommend you look out for it, because it is highly entertaining as well as being deadly serious, and it gets results. And clearly they get a lot more results than you simply see on the screen.
Yeah.
Because if a programme of any kind, or a column in a newspaper or whatever, starts getting results, you will find people will write into it saying, okay, it mightn't get featured on the programme, but if that wholesaler or retailer gets a call from that programme saying, I have got on to them, they'd stop and think about whether they're going to still mess me around.
Yeah.
On the second thing about, oddly enough, the only place I have experienced, I did work for a couple of years in BBC Northern Ireland, and I do remember being brought to an office and asked not to continue with the current affairs programme I was doing for Spotlight. I'd only just begun it and made my exploratory calls on injuries in rugby. And I was asked not to go ahead with the programme by someone who was not, I didn't know the BBC Northern Ireland set up very well, you know, but I was a stranger in the place in a way.
Yeah.
I was knocked sideways by the idea that, you know, we prefer if you didn't do this program. That had never been said to me in RTE, and if it had been said to me in RTE, I would have felt comfortable enough about, you know, spreading the word that it was being said to me among colleagues. But in the BBC, I wasn't, but I was, and this was 1986. It was just after winning that thing. I went north for a couple of years when the Anglo-Irish Tribune was signed, and I did a lot of work there on politics and that. But I just couldn't believe when that. So it shows you it's not just commercial interests. There are other interests who try to lean on policymakers in various organs of the media to say, look, could you call off your reporter if you can? Okay.
Any more questions? Can I just ask you to give one bit of advice to them? You know, just starting off as young journalists, something that might have helped you when you were starting.
I think it's important to know what your aim is in journalism, your overall aim. I mean, what do you want to do by being a journalist? You know, not in terms of a list of to-dos. What is it essentially that you're trying to achieve by being a journalist? Is it simply to make a living and to have a quiet life? I mean, there are possible ways of doing journalism that would not be too demanding, but you could show just technical proficiency and do that. But on the other end of the spectrum, there is journalism that requires a huge commitment of time and energy, and maybe working outside your comfort zone. and not being too sure where it's going to bring you ultimately. And I think you have to choose where on that spectrum you want to be at various stages of your journalistic career. I'm not saying journalism should have 100% call on you as a person, but you have to decide how much you're prepared to give to it in order to achieve things that you believe are important. And I think a lot of people go into journalism for the same reason that they go into, in my experience, for the same reason that they go into caring professions, where you want to interact with people like that man who sat back to camera in his wheelchair, and he asked if he could be guaranteed anonymity, and you try to ensure that his voice is disguised and so on. But you want to put it out there that there is this serviceability for people like him. And I think if you do feel that your education gives you a duty of care for other people who are less, who have less access to information, and therefore have less access to power, then you can use journalism for that purpose. You can also use journalism to make money, and some people combine the two. Some people who go into campaigning journalism can find themselves big sellers. But I don't think it's the easiest way to make money if you go into investigative or campaigning journalism. The second thing is that I would urge people to live as much as possible in a non-journalistic world. Try not to live as a club of journalists. The working hours are such that often journalists end up socialising with each other, eating with each other, and that's good to a degree. You do need to get to know the people you're working beside, as somebody once said to me after a difficult experience making a programme. He said it to a colleague of mine. He said, "You're the kind of guy I'd like to be beside in the trench in the First World War. You're dependable, and when the pressure is on, I know how you're going to react, and I would have you there next time that we're in a difficult bind trying to do a story." So it's good to know the caliber of the people you're working with, but it's also very important to know the issues that are current and problematic in people's lives. The issues that delight people, the things that delight people, and the things that burden people. And it's very important to get outside your income group. In the case of myself, as a kind of a full-time journalist, I can say I'm in an income group. In the case of most of you, you probably will find it very difficult to get into, to get a decent income quickly. But so you probably know many of the preoccupations people have who are on average are lower incomes and who may not have had the same education advantages as yourselves. So keep in touch with that, because ultimately, by doing a public service, you get a great support from society in return. I mean, it's really affirming when people come back to you and say, you did a lot for us in making that report. It's very, very enriching in your life to be able to, get the odd card or letter or phone call or whatever saying, that meant so much to us. Now, often it's families who, and I have great reservations about it, where people have to lay bare their personal tragedies in order to get the HSE to change its decision about giving a grant, a domiciliary care allowance or something to a family with a severely, profoundly disabled offspring. And I've worries about that seems to be the only way that people can shock bureaucracy into, like a man who had his carers allowance deprived, taken from him out in leak slip, and I covered it. I got it actually through somebody who wrote. I got it through an indirect route. Someone wrote in to a colleague. The colleague said, "Could you look into this?" I looked into it through the Carers Association, another very good network of people. The Carers Association said, "We've looked into that. We don't think it's as cut and dried as you thought it was when that source got onto you. But actually, we've got another story that is cut and dried, and here it is." And I went out to this man who had given up his work as a railway worker when his son was about 3 years of age to look after him permanently. And when the son turned 18, he was deprived of his carer's allowance for the son. And in the meantime, the fellow had heart surgery, his health had deteriorated, his wife was was still working but on quite a low income. And we ran that story. And there was a huge reaction to it, not immediately, but there was a quick reaction from the Department of Social Protection, who released a statement saying that they had ordered a review of the case, and within about 48 hours they'd returned the carers allowance to this man. When our online colleagues put that up on the RT website, we didn't run a television report saying the man's got his carers allowance back. We just put it up online. We got 5,000 hits on Facebook on that. That's one story alone. And we got 250,000 hits on the website, but we got about 5,000 messages back in on the web. You know, people absolutely disgusted, wondering how public servants could sleep at night when they're doing this kind of thing to people. It is amazing how people feel a solidarity with the individual case, who's willing to go out there, and they get great support. And you know, I would say that in the majority of cases, when you do this kind of work, if you do your research well, you don't sometimes even need the person to appear up on screen. You can get others. You can get the postmistresses, the retired guards. You can get documentary evidence, and you can say to someone, if we're sued for this, will you sign an affidavit? If it comes to a libel case in court, will you sign an affidavit? There are various levels at which you can go. But lawyers will tell you you need that affidavit now. You don't. It's not after. It's not when because sometimes a credible witness who may give you documentary evidence and so on could back down when Hardy comes to Hardy and the lawsuit is about to take place. The witness might say, no, actually I can't do it. I'm just not up to it. A bit like the woman and the moneylender and that before. But there are various ways to skin a cat, and if an editor says to you that this is too much trouble, we just don't have the resources to do this. If you have a decent understanding of media law, and if you can talk to media lawyers in any of the organisations you get placements in, find out how they go about it. What are the kinds of things that they would watch out for? That because what you're doing with media law is you're saying, what are the risks here? Is there a risk that if we're sued, is there a significant risk we lose? Is there a small risk we lose? Is there a good chance we win? They're the kind of estimates that a media lawyer will think. And have a conversation with the media lawyer in that vein, you know. These are presentable witnesses. If they had to go into a box for the Limerick leader or whatever, they would actually make the judge would be impressed by these people and the evidence that they will bring into the case. And the lawyer would say, well, then get them to name themselves in the quotes, you know, or in the clips. You know, that is the best way.
It's a source.
But sometimes if you can get primary documents, if you can get documents from, say, what do they call it when a company goes belly up? From a liquidation. If you can get documents from a liquidation, if you can get court documents about applications for licenses and so on, contemporaneous reports by court reporters who've been in court, they've done the work. I've sometimes run people in Radio Nabil and said, were you in court for that priest's trial and so on? I need names and you know, use whatever solid evidence you can get, and don't be deterred by difficulties. If you have an editor's support, and if the editor is getting legal advice, you will be in a strong position to tell your story. And don't be discouraged if one or two of them go wrong. You know, there are always lessons to be learned from the experience. But sometimes you can be your own worst enemy. It's good to work with other people, by the way. Woodward and Bernstein wouldn't have broken Watergate if it was just Woodward or it was just Bernstein. You know, to work as a pair can be a great strength, because you can, you know, especially as I said earlier, if you can trust the caliber of the person you're working with, and if you both know what I mentioned at the very beginning of this interview, if you know why you're in journalism, what it is you want to achieve. The rest is strategy and tactics and getting as much time to live the rest of your life as you can. But if if you're committed, it can give you huge job satisfaction, in my experience, if you're at that side of the spectrum where you're prepared to put a lot of energy into seeing it as basically a caring profession centred on the welfare of others as well as on yourself.
That's a very good note to finish on, Joe, and thanks very much for